Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Evaluating the Impacts of Citizens Sharing Their Gifts, Lessons Learned from Abundant Communities Edmonton. My name is Connor Judge, and I'm a manager of cities with the Tamarack Institute, and it is my absolute pleasure to be welcoming our guests today for this webinar. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Before we kind of dive right in though, I do just want to quickly do a land acknowledgement and some tech housekeeping. So we begin this webinar by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. As part of our commitment to Canada's truth and reconciliation process, we recognize the importance of land recognitions as just one small way of honoring and demonstrating respect for the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island. So I am personally joining from Tekaronto, which is derived from the Mohawk expression, trees submerged in water. This land is colonially known as Toronto. This land is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. By acknowledging these lands and their original stewards, I am trying to position myself, a white settler, within the social, historical, and political context embedded within the lands known as Canada, and as well as commemorating Indigenous peoples' principal kinship to this land. So please, if you haven't already, please share with us what lands you're joining from. And alrighty, let's get into it. So it is an absolute pleasure today to me to be welcoming our guests, Howard Lawrence and Jean-Marie. I'll just quickly introduce them, and then we're going to dive right into the first question. So Howard Lawrence consults on neighborhood health across North America and is employed with the City of Edmonton's Neighborhood section. He is the co-founder with the City of Edmonton, John McKnight, and Peter Block of the Abundant Community Initiative, which we will refer to as ACE in this call. Assisting municipalities in refining their approaches to ABCD is part of the work that Howard does on his day-to-day basis. And Howard continues to work collaboratively with the ABCD Institute to find ways to enable neighborhoods to collectively envision and produce their preferred futures. And now I'll introduce Jean-Marie. Jean-Marie Chapeau is the Consulting Director of Evaluating Impact at the Tamarack Institute. Jean-Marie mobilizes his experience, his passion, and curiosity to promote evaluation as a tool for empowerment in communities and to accompany individuals and groups in their learning processes. He is constantly seeking to build bridges between changemakers involved in inventing local solutions to poverty and exclusion. Jean-Marie has been involved in community development and social change for over 25 years. He previously worked at Centraide of Greater Montreal, implementing innovative strategies and projects aimed at collective capacity building, such as training and coaching, particularly in social impact measurement, strategic learning, and organizational development. In this role, Jean-Marie was responsible for the various evaluation and learning components of the Collective Impact Project and Montreal's neighborhood-based strategy to reduce poverty, and he also developed the evaluation capacity building approach to support local participatory evaluation. So Howard, Jean-Marie, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. It's lovely to be here.
All right, well, without further ado, let's hop into the first question. And Jean-Marie, I want to start with you. What is participatory evaluation, and why do people working at the neighborhood level need to know about it?
Okay, thank you, Connor. I just wanted to say that I'm very happy to share the stage with you, Howard. And I'm really looking forward to knowing more about what you do in Edmonton. So it's a pleasure to be with you. So we can go to the first slide. I have 4 slides to talk about participatory evaluation. So it's very in a nutshell. In a participatory evaluation, the community is the evaluator and the evaluator is the community. So the community takes the responsibility of impact measurement on learning or strategic learning. And also, and that's really important, the evaluation process in itself contributes to the goals of the project by engaging partners, by generating a common vision of change in the community. So this is my definition of a participatory evaluation. So now, if we go a little bit deeper, we can go to the next slide. Who participates in a participatory evaluation? I would say anyone who will have impact on or be affected by the project, issue, or initiative. So at Tamarack, we sometimes talk about two very important groups in an engagement process or in a participatory evaluation process. Context experts who are the residents with lived experience, including children and youth. They are the people who experientially know about the issue that we are addressing. And also we have the content experts. They are professionals, staff in your organization, service providers, leaders with formal power who have knowledge, tools, and resources to address the issue. And we will talk about these two groups a little bit in detail later in the webinar. We can go to the next slide. The local evaluation ecosystem can be wide and can be very diversified in terms of organizations and partners. So I won't spend too much time on this map, but this is an example of an evaluation ecosystem mapping exercise that shows you that in a community with the citizens, with the people with lived experience, there are also a wide spectrum of actors that can be involved in an evaluation process, whatever this process is. We can go directly to the next slide, please. And why should we do participatory evaluation? Why do we do a participatory evaluation? First, one first reason is the empowerment of participants, of citizens, of informants. So participatory evaluation encourages meaningful engagement practices. It builds capacity of citizens and local actors. It strengthens connections among citizens and build and strengthen relationships overall. So this is the link with the ABCD framework that we are going to talk about today. There are other reasons. The questions and data stay locally and culturally relevant, leading to higher value among community members. So we can disaggregate data and have results that are more relevant, more inclusive, and more helpful, finally, in the community. There are other reasons. We can go to the next point, a greater accuracy on the relevance of findings, and it encourages locally ownership for outcomes on findings. And I think I have two next points. It improves program performance, community actions, on the strategy, the local strategies in general, and it sustains participatory evaluation, sustains organizational or community learning and growth. So these are a few reasons why participatory evaluation is helpful in some context. On the next slide, and this is the last one. Oh, there was also another point: greater opportunity to scale learning and practices, of course. On the next slide, I wanted to share very quickly how we can engage participants in an evaluation process. So there are different stages, different steps where we can be involved, and where a community can involve different actors. We can involve actors like citizens in early reflections on objectives, on project planning, of course. We can involve citizens in the governance of evaluation, an evaluation committee, an evaluation steering committee, for example. We can generate strong evaluation questions also by engaging citizens, by asking what do we want to measure and what do we want to learn within this project or in a short or long term perspective. Of course, working with content and context experts is the best way to create and design very precise and very accurate indicators in order to answer evaluation questions. Of course, there is also the analysis part, so involving the community in on the data collection, involving the community in data collection and collective analysis are also important steps. On the last one is sharing and using results on learning. So a community can be involved at different levels of the evaluation process. And this is important because when you reflect on how to engage the community in an evaluation process, you can choose and you can choose very precisely in which dimensions the persons and the actors you want to involve are the best, will be the most helpful. So that was my last slide in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks, Jean-Marie. Yeah, I think something when I think about participatory evaluation is it embraces that grassroots approach. It's, kind of allowing the experts, the content experts, as well as the context experts to meet in the middle, but it very much is kind of rooted in that grassroots approach. So thanks for that great overview of participatory evaluation. Now, Howard, I want to pivot to you. And my question is, what is asset-based community development, ABCD? And what value does it bring when engaging residents at the neighborhood level?
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. And thanks, Jean-Marie, for that presentation too. I hadn't seen it. And it first made me think of a woman in the city who was in our evaluation department, Louise Gendreau. And I want a special thanks to her in that when we were looking at ABCD and the Edmonton context, she was appointed as the person who would set up evaluation for us, and she introduced us to this idea of participatory evaluation. And she was a seasoned veteran in the area of evaluation and represented us and the way we were going to look at the success of what we were doing with people in the higher levels of the city's administration. And she was adamant about this participatory evaluation being the method that we, the method that we used. So those were years we had been working as a city with leaders in the ABCD movement for years. So John McKnight had been here kind of coaching us years and years ago. Jim Deers had been here coaching us years and years ago. And the focus, generally speaking, was on troubled neighborhoods. And this is articulated in the Green Book. What are the elements that are engaged in a neighborhood when a neighborhood does well? And overwhelmingly, it was neighborhoods who looked to themselves to strengthen those assets that they already had to accomplish what they wanted in their neighborhoods. So those assets were, and we're going to review this a number of times, the individual gifts of the residents, the groupings of those residents in the neighborhood, animating those gifts, coming together. So a gifted singer came together with other gifted singers and musicians to start a choir. Then thirdly, the agencies or institutions of a neighborhood, everything from us as city leaders to churches in the neighborhood to various different agencies to come in and were locally based and helpful to the neighborhood. And then, there's some other assets as well that are employed that have demonstrated that these are what transforms a neighborhood into the kind of healthy neighborhood, and we'll talk about health in a minute, the healthy neighborhood that the residents would like. So we took those principles of ABCD and asked John McKnight and said, John, can we work together as a city? And I was a consultant at the time. As a consultant, ABCD consultant, could we work toward employing ABCD in all neighborhoods in the city? Because all neighborhoods need to be vibrant and flourish and continue to work on their own health as neighborhoods. And so this is what we did. We piloted in a number of areas, and then continue to work throughout the city in every neighborhood. Now, Edmonton has, and it's important to note, well-delineated neighborhoods. When you ask a person in Edmonton, what neighborhood are you from, they will quickly tell you the name of the neighborhood. I live in the Highlands neighborhood. That neighborhood is not only delineated, but it is at a human scale. There's a size in which we can be known characters. We might not be known by name, but we're known characters in the neighborhood. And it's also a neighborhood that can meet many of our day-to-day needs. This is very similar to the new discussion and the concept of the 15-minute city or the 15-minute neighborhood. So we live in a city that's generally made up of those kinds of neighborhoods. And then the other thing, so they're delineated. And then the other thing that they are is they're activated neighborhoods. We have in place a system of neighborhood leadership or governance, which is in part, at least with the residents, able to lead a community development process leading toward neighborhood health, which they're invested in. So we have, in the case, looking back what Jean-Marie said, we have this activated group of context experts. These are people who are living in the neighborhood, who can speak to the health and the actions of the neighborhood. And then we have a city that over 100 years has evolved to bring content expertise. And this is the group that I'm a part of, the neighborhood section. We're actually called the neighborhood section of the community development branch in the city of Edmonton. And we bring content expertise, and the content expertise in this regard is ABCD, and we bring it to all neighborhoods. And we'll talk more about what exactly that means, how we do that, but residents are engaged in every neighborhood as the content experts, and we as a city come in with other agencies as well as, and particularly Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, which is the convening organization of all of these leadership groups that are working toward healthy neighborhoods in our city, some 150 of them. They also have a role to play in convening the various common participants in the neighborhood. So in a neighborhood, we might have a community league president. We call it a president because these organizations in the neighborhood are constituted by the something act of government that needs a president, secretary, treasurer. And those people are brought together by EFCL. There's also people who are interested in the soccer program in almost every neighborhood, or sports programs in neighborhoods, so that Edmonton Federation of Community League would convene them and talk about how do we include everybody in this particular sports program, or how do we do this sports program better.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I really appreciate how you kind of answered the question by providing more context on the history of the city, because I think the city of Edmonton is a very unique city, and thinking about kind of like the role that democracy plays within, I'd say, is probably unique to other cities. I would say probably within the province, but also across Canada. There's a lot of actors that kind of contribute to this this ability to kind of bring ABCD at the neighborhood level. So thanks for diving into that. But I have a follow-up question. Just thinking about the title of this webinar, evaluating the impact of citizens sharing their gift. I would just love to hear from you. What to you is a gift?
That's great. Well, I want to go back just again to this idea of content experts and context experts. One of the moves that we've made as a city is to encourage people who are content experts. Now, because we're doing community development, asset-based community development in every neighborhood, now we have the opportunity to ask them to participate, bringing their expertise as content experts to their own neighborhoods and be context experts in their own neighborhoods. So now I'm a community development expert doing community development in my own neighborhood. It's not a conflict of interest. It's a commitment to my interest. I want to live in an awesomely healthy neighborhood. I will bring my content expertise to my context. And when we do that, it performs a research and development role. I learn about what it is to do this in my own neighborhood. It's not an abstract idea. It becomes very concrete when I employ it in my own neighborhood. And this is something that we have really encouraged, because it's also great not only for professional development, but research and development. So, Connor, to your question, what is a gift? I'm doing this research and development in my own neighborhood. Now, we talked about animating the gifts of individuals. How are we going to do this? In our neighborhood and in many other neighborhoods, we select, and you'll see this in the slides later, a person called a block connector or a point person on the block who will go to every neighbor that they have. 20 neighbors is approximately the number. And they will go to them, introduce themselves, and ask them a series of questions, one of which is kind of a very typical ABCD questions. What skills, gifts, and experiences do you have that you can offer to the neighborhood? Okay, I want you to think about that. If you were a resident and somebody came to your door, somebody that you knew, you've seen them around, you've been at the block party with them, and they came to your door and they asked you that question. So, Connor, or all of the participants in this presentation, what skills, gifts, or experiences would you like to contribute to our neighborhood? Okay, so I'm trying to think of the answer. Now, I'll tell you what an answer is that often comes. Well, I don't really know. I need some time to think about that, is the subtext. And here's the next question. The next statement would be, well, I'll do, what is there to do? And then you stand there and you're doing this exercise as a block connector, block leader, block point person. And you think, well, I don't really know all that there is to do in my neighborhood. And then when you hesitate to ask that question, then they'll say something like this. Well, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. Just get back to me. And so out of those kinds of experiences that we've had over the years, there's a number of ways to remedy that or help move it along. One would be to have a bit of a listing of the various jobs that there are to do in the neighborhood. And it serves a bit as a primer to them, letting you know what their gift, skill, or experience is. And we really add that experience. It opens up a bit of a broader level of contribution from the neighbor. If they say, well, I really don't have anything to offer, you say, well, I can see that you're a grandma. You probably have lots of experience in the area of parenting and grandparenting. Would you want to be a part of a group that discusses that? Or would you like to use that on your block or on our block? Right? Because it's our block. So now I've met that grandma. I can say, wow, we need to be in touch with her so that we can nurture her grandmotherliness among the kids and frankly, the adults on this block. So the other thing that we're working on currently in my neighborhood is to put together a bit of a to-do list for the neighborhood. So because we have neighborhood leadership, basically a to-do list happens naturally, but it's never, really put down into paper. But that'd be an example of R&D happening because we as content experts are living in a context, experimenting with it. Now, a to-do list or a task list in my neighborhood might work in this neighborhood, but not in others. But we have to think of ways to prime people around those very difficult questions of what gifts, skills, or experiences can you contribute to the neighborhood?
Thanks, Howard. That it was that question was out of personal interest, I'll admit, just because I know you've had so many conversations, through the Block Connector program, and so hearing what you understood as a gift, because I struggled when I was first coming, learning about ABCD to kind of conceptualize what a gift is, and I think the reality is that I've learned is that we all have gifts, we just maybe don't know it's a gift, and I think that kind of touches on what you just said, Howard.
Yeah. So Connor, I want to say, and what's really helpful, and this is a bit of an innovation for ABCD. The idea of asking neighbors a series of questions, historically, and often it was done by somebody in the neighborhood. We innovated to say, let's do it on the block. And the reason why we're doing it on the block is it has a layering function of connecting the block together, so that when I say, and actually this is a real story, there was a fella on my block who said, I don't really have any gifts. And I said, Bob, his name isn't Bob. I said, Bob, well, let's just be in touch around this. So he catches me in the back alley one day and he says, Howard, come here. Does this. And I come over and he's kind of in camel because that's what he wears. He's a lovely fella. And he says to me, Howard, you asked me about my gifts. I have guns. If ever there's a problem in this neighborhood, I have guns. I went, okay, awesome, Bob, that's really helpful. But it allowed him to percolate in an area, and obviously for this conversation, to build some trust with me that he could say, and that he knew that this was a bit irregular, a bit non-Canadian, a lot of things, but because we had built trust on the block, he was able to communicate that with me. And I think that happens over time. This is not a program that gets done once. This is a way of living and a culture that we're trying to form in a neighborhood. And that's an important point. This is not a program. This is a framework that creates a culture. ABCD is a framework that creates a culture. Anyways, I could go on, but I won't.
Thanks, Howard. That's a great story. So I think we'll move on to our next question. So we had some slides, Howard, but I think what we'll do is we'll maybe just jump over these in the sake of the time. And you've talked a little bit about the Block Connector program. You've kind of explained. So maybe what we can do is just maybe in a few minutes kind of go through these slides. You can quickly kind of explain maybe the 5 quadrants, and we'll go over the theory of change. So I'm gonna hand it back over to you.
Yeah. So we're looking for a method to animate the assets of the neighborhood. So those assets are the people and their gifts, creating circles of people with those gifts. And then we're looking for agencies to support those gifts and individuals as they create and envision their preferred future as a neighborhood. So how do we do that? What are the methods? And in the 4 essentials of asset-based community development, it's a very short document written by John and Cormac. They articulate some methods, and the first method is actually identifying connectors. So we want to find people in our neighborhood who are connectors, but what do we want them to connect to? And this is where I mentioned earlier, we want them to connect to their block. So we want to take that nuclear family, that series of 20 nuclear families or households perhaps on the block, and get them connected. They're generally mostly isolated from one another. We want to ask one person to connect them together and become from individual gifts to a group called the block. So these are really cool groups called the block. And so in a neighborhood of 1,000 homes, that would be approximately, and 20 per block, that's going to be approximately 50 blocks. So we want to find a connector on every block. So some people have called these block hosts. That was in the UK. In the States, we have a place that called them street connectors. They can be various names, but they connect people up. So they take the initiative to introduce themselves and then introduce people on the block over time. Again, it's a culture. And then some of the methods that they would use would be celebration. So a block party makes lots of sense. So this is the framework. So when you see here, there's only 2 block connectors, but in reality, in a neighborhood of 1,000 homes, which is quite a human scale, there's going to be 50. And then to support this movement, because that's a simple task to meet your neighbors, but it's very hard. It's very difficult. So we need support behind them. And we have a support team. We try to assemble a support team in advance even of this initiative in a neighborhood of people who just think neighboring is a great idea, and they will persist in the neighborhood to think neighboring is a good idea and a valuable initiative. So they persist. Over time, we hopefully will find somebody that is gifted to go to various blocks in the neighborhood and identify the block connector with maybe a simple question. I'll knock on a door, catch somebody out on their street and say, our neighborhood's doing a neighborliness initiative. Do you know anybody on the block, or maybe it's you, that would be good at being the point person for this block? And they might say, well, yeah, my wife would be good at this, or I'm good at this, or I know somebody that would be good at this. And then, of course, this whole initiative connects to neighborhood leadership. And they are the ones that are evaluating the utility of it as you move forward. The utility in that neighborhoods have tasks to do. Is this getting us that? There's going to be connections among neighbors, creating a neighborly vibe, a warmth in the neighborhood. And new groups are going to be created. We're going to see a new moms group, a youth group, a hockey group, a soccer group, a social justice group. All will be formed in the neighborhood. Those are the things that the neighborhood leadership is looking for.
Awesome. I really appreciate you kind of going into the program and kind of explaining the different roles. Now I kind of want to take a step back and now really let's focus on that theory of change. And maybe you could just quickly just kind of walk us through this theory of change, because we've kind of gone to the, actually what happens on the ground, but maybe the theory of change could be maybe a shift in thinking about this more at a higher level. So I'll pass it back to you, Howard, to go over this slide.
Good. Yeah, so this is our theory of change that we put out there to city leadership and city staff. So up at the top, you can see that in some respect, these are goals, and these are all evidence-based research. So everything that we do, we really are employing scholarly research to this. So really what we found is that there's lots of research to support what we've done, but there are few methods that can inform us how to make this happen. And so those top 3 light blue circles come from some research on what is a built community. If we're community building professionals, how do we know when we have a built community? So in some respects, these are visionary circles. So this is how you can tell you're in a built community. When you walk around in a built community, or when you are a resident of a built community, lots of people are out and about waving and saying hi. So there you go, neighbor to neighbor interactions. There's a vibe in the neighborhood of connection. Second one, large number of block associations. So there's just the notion of a block association is historic. It's when blocks came together to be a supportive social unit. So this is back to the days of, I can knock on my neighbor's door to get a cup of sugar, a couple of eggs. It's the block is this subunit of the neighborhood that people mostly experience the neighborhood at the block or the next door neighbor level. And then finally, through those high numbers of block associations and the neighborly vibe that's present in our neighborhood, more groups form as people say, hey, you're out walking, where are you going? I'm going to the golf course. I see your clubs, you're loading on the back of your car. Why don't we get together and go golf someday? You know what, there's a number of people that would like to golf. Why don't we start a golf group? Or you see a bike of a neighbor on a bike riding down, and you say, hey, I like to bike too. Maybe we could bike together. Or my neighbor block connector has said to me that you're interested in social justice. And we've had some good conversations about this. Why don't we form a group, an action group in the neighborhood? So there you see those 3 visionary statements in the what it takes to have or what it looks like to have a built community. Then the areas of work, I mentioned these earlier. These are really the methods So we can evaluate according to those top three. Are we seeing more neighbor-to-neighbor interactions? Are we seeing more block associations? Are we seeing groups formed? But we can also evaluate our work. So as a neighborhood leadership, we might say, are we discovering groups? Are we discovering gifts? And are we welcoming people through those conversations that I mentioned earlier? Are we portraying, this is the asset map, what we're hearing from neighborhoods? Are we sharing it amongst each other? Are we celebrating? Remember, not just at the block level, but is our bike group sharing, and is the neighborhood as a whole celebrating? I mean, and then, so those are the methods. And then we look at the outcomes. And these are more abstract, but they're still wonderful outcomes that we as a city want to have: increased citizen and neighborhood capacity. This is really the goal. We're trying to have neighborhoods use their own gifts and to create power to produce the outcome they want. So, all right, that's our theory of change.
Thanks, Howard. I really appreciate that overview and that question of how do we know we have a built or developed community. I think that's a really powerful question that I imagine a lot of the people that are on this call that are doing community development, they're currently trying to seek the answer. And I also really appreciate you kind of, really sharing about the methods, because I think that's something that, Jean-Marie is just about to get to, is like the idea of methods and, how do we actually evaluate, what is a gift and what is the impact of people sharing it. So let's hop into the next question. Jean-Marie, we're going to go back to you for this one first. And, thinking about participatory evaluation, how do we evaluate, gift sharing, and how do we measure its impact? How do we tease out the outputs? I was just wondering how your thoughts on how we could potentially approach this. And you're muted, Jean-Marie.
Sorry. That's so fascinating to hear you, Howard. So to answer the question, that's a large question actually, Connor. I propose that we just go back to the core concept of ABCD. On the ABCD framework is based on the assumption that by generating connections and sharing gifts, we improve the well-being of the community. So that's the basic. This is my formulation. So the first question to ask ourselves is, what do we want to measure, and what are our evaluation questions? It was quite obvious in what Howard presented, the theory of change. There are some things that we want to quantify: number of potential gifts identified by block connectors, number of gifts shared, number of connectors, number of connections, and so on. But if we want to move a little bit forward, how do we measure the short and long-term changes that these connections, that these gifts are generated in the community? And what I like on the theory of change that you presented is that we have both dimensions. So I would say outputs and some outcomes also. So some slight shifts and changes that are observable in the community. So that's the big question. How do we measure with the population itself the increase of trust in the community, a bigger sense of belonging, a decrease in insulation, a change in the environment and the landscape in the city? How do we measure the emergence of new ideas? How do we measure the stability of local groups, which is in your theory of change? How do we measure increased neighborhood livability, and so on? And how do we contribute to the final impact, which is a neighborly city? So having this question and generating this reflection in the community, within the community, with the citizens, with the people involved, with the context and content expert is important, and is something that we can do if we want to go a little bit beyond the measurement of short-term outputs, I would say, so number of connections and so on. That's not easy to do, but by having this conversation about how do we measure these changes with the population itself, we can approach some very interesting way to answer the question. So asking people, how would you measure the increase of the sense of belonging in our community? What would be the indicators, the insights that you capture in the community that could help to answer this question? So I think that having this deep reflection with a context and content expert, or with a sample of people, because it's hard to have the conversation with the whole population, but it can be an interesting step. After that, the question is, who can help to generate and to provide answers in the community? So this is where we can think of who in the community can observe some phenomena. So of course, the population itself can generate answers. So you can survey, you can do door to door, you can ask in this example, the block connectors to generate some information about what changed in the life of people, family by family or door by door. You can do focus groups, you can do online surveys, but there are also some groups of people in the community that we call key informants, but specific people who are key when it comes to observe some changes in the community. For example, elders have an historical perspective of the community. So they are very, very well placed to analyze and to share the changes that they see over the years. At the other side of the spectrum, newcomers in the community, new neighbors, this is a very interesting group, because you can ask them how they feel that they have been welcomed in the community. What happened when they arrived? How many days it took for their neighbors to come with an apple pie and to ring the bell. So these are an example of key informants, but there are also people who are, we talked about content experts, people who are working, living and working in the community. So the Post Canada staff, the business owners, the shop owners, or school directors, for example. All these people can observe changes in the community through a different angle. And also, in order to answer the evaluation question, there are a big bunch of existing data that can be found, and that can be searched, and that can be found. So data about from public transportation system, police call, citizen municipal hotline, for example, court decisions about neighborhood conflicts, and there are a lot of them. So by combining these three sources of data, direct information from the population, information, outcome observation from key informants, and existing data, you can triangulate and you can have a good sense of what is changing in the community and how the work is contributing to the final impact, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean-Marie. I really like how you kind of provided the three different examples, and then also, that you could then use triangulation to find them. And it's really interesting that the examples that you provided really are kind of focusing on, what is existing already within the community, which I think kind of really does align with that, it's the intersection of ABCD and participatory evaluation.
Yeah, and maybe if I can just add something, Connor, identifying the opportunities in the community in order to collect information. In our example, block connectors are a very important important persons, and they are an opportunity to generate information. But there are a lot of activities in the community that you can use in order to generate data. So school meetings, family parties, block parties, and so on. There are moments where people are gathering and where you can also collect information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think what we'll do is we're gonna hop on to the next question. We are slowly approaching the question period. So if you have not already, or thank you to those who have shared their questions, but if you have not already, please put them in the chat box and the Q&A panel. We'll try to get to your question. So our next question, we'll skip over that slide, is about relationships. And I think, you know, at least that's kind of the key theme I'm hearing through kind of both the importance of participatory evaluation, but also at the same time ABCD is it's this relationship building, kind of building those connections between residents. So your people are knowing the people on their block, but it's also the idea that, you know, the city is understanding, and like the institutions and other kind of players within the community are getting to know one another. So Howard, I'm going to start with you because I think, you know, you have a bunch of stories, and I think I've seen some comments that they've been really enjoying your story. So let's give them another one. Do you have any stories of, you know, how relationships, you know, that were created between residents from, say, like the Block Connector program were used to inform evaluation? And you're on mute.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, I want to speak to Jean-Marie's statement. I love the evaluation ecosystem. I just think that, so it just says that there's, you know, many ways and avenues for evaluation. And he mentioned the notion of sense of belonging, and really when we think of relationships, this is, you know, critical. One of the stories we have is we called a person named David Chavez in New York, who is a master around sense of community index. And we spoke with him, and he encouraged us to form a sense of community survey ourselves. And so the city of Edmonton has an ongoing sense of community survey that it has many methods online, et cetera, to get that out there in large scale on an annual basis. So it's a powerful tool to evaluate how our relationships, and then we can extrapolate from then how our children, how our seniors, how our jobs, how our safety, from that sense of community. And that is the experience of people in a neighborhood, their complex experiences of being a neighbor. So we hear lots of stories, and they communicate a lot of benefits through a particular experience. And the one kind of experience that seems to land so many benefits so quickly in terms of a neighborhood, and we've seen this in the research as well. Who'd have thunk it? But it's a block social. The block of 20 residents, so it's not going to be a big thing. It's going to be fairly small because only half of the individuals are going to attend. It has so many layering benefits because you know, fundamentally the neighboring relationship is not like a family. It's not like friends. It's a little bit like both, but it in the research is called a weak tie relationship. It's that touching base kind of relationship. And so the biggest impact that we find that we have relationally at the block level is that we just create a vibe on the block, a sense of settled well-being in your stomach. You feel good about living there. When you drive home, you're not driving into a strange, alienated place. You're driving into your home. And so people will comment often in that regard. We live in a great place. It's so nice to just chat. I ran into a neighbor last night. He's a new neighbor in the back alley. And he said, the reason why we really appreciate the community that we feel in this neighborhood. He's speaking to the neighborly vibe, and the impact is a deep psychosocial impact in his life. So those neighbor block level parties. Now, I said that maybe only 10 people come to those parties. A real utility of the party is that it's local, so it's hyper inclusive. You know, walk out your door, you can come for as long as you want. You can look out your window to see if it's safe, all of those things. And even if you choose not to come, because it's your blocks, you have received an invitation to belong. So we really are serving the deepest human need to create a sense of belonging. So at the block level and then at the neighborhood level. So yeah, and people would say, well, it's just a party. To that we say, well, family celebrations at holidays are just a party as well, but they're critical to the family. The block social is to the neighbor as a block what those parties are to the family. Super important. I don't know if there's other that I can get at, but for now, I'll leave it there.
Awesome, thanks, Howard. I think that answers the question beautifully. So I'm looking at the time. Hopefully that hour goes by fast. So we do have a couple more questions, but there's one I really want to touch on before we kind of go to the Q&A period, which we do have quite a few questions. And Howard, this is on lessons learned, and I'm gonna, this could probably be a challenging ask, but could you maybe boil it down to maybe 2 or 3 takeaways that ACE had while doing this evaluation? Is there anything that you, for example, are going to maybe do differently for the next impact report?
2 things. One is, and I mentioned it at outset, what did we do that was right? Because of Louise Gendreau, we started down the path of participatory evaluation or developmental evaluation, which has just made all the difference in the world. It gave us a way of thinking about what we're evaluating. And part of that thinking was, we're not here to just report. We're here to innovate, to create, and to see change happen. And evaluation is not a perfunctory event. It's not something we just have to do to get it out of the way. It actually serves to make the initiative and the framework we're trying to work with better. So to that end, too, I think one of the things that we would want to emphasize in even greater ways is the participation of content experts in their context. I don't know how, it's difficult to say to a content expert, you need to do this in your own context, because it feels like you're pushing some kind of professional boundary. But it really, if not for the well-being or the benefit of their own neighborhood, for the benefit of the whole initiative, for you to be a practitioner, a context expert with all the content that you have over the years, could you please do this for the initiative and for us?
Thank you so much, Howard. I think I completely agree. I think what I'm going to do now is, we have a few questions in the chat box, and I noticed that a couple of them are kind of about the Block Connector program. And there actually are some great resources that ACE has on their website, kind of explaining the Block Connector program and how to incorporate it. So if we do have the time, we'll get to those questions. But I think there's a really interesting question, Howard, that I would love to know what your answer is. And it's from Stephanie, and Stephanie asks, how can ABCD be done in neighborhoods where people are very transitory? People are always moving.
Yeah, well, we work in all kinds of neighborhoods, and certainly neighborhoods like that. And particularly if it's high density and rental, the neighbors getting to know each other really helps with tenant retention. So the very nature of creating a welcoming community or a community neighborly vibe actually will slow the movement of tenants. People will never want to move because they're enjoying connection. How do you do it? Well, you just do it. People will, if they move regularly, that's fine. You want them to have a wonderful experience as it is. Now, if they're short-term tenants, and they animate their block, they get it going. Part of what happens when you animate your block, you get to know everybody, you create that culture on your block, and other people participate. So on my block over 10 years, it's hard to tell who the leader is, because everybody's participating like a family on the block. So if the lead figure steps aside, well, the rest of the block still gets that. And you've built in some traditions, like we get together in our back alley and have a Halloween party. We, by nature, hang out in the back alley so that when we want to visit, we put a table in our back alley for people to connect around. So I would say that a tenant short-term tenanting, short-term residency is not a problem to be afraid of. It's an opportunity.
I like that framing. It's an opportunity versus a challenge. We have two questions that are kind of similar. I'm going to try to pair them together. So Heather asks, how many blocks or a kilometer radius would you suggest for a neighborhood? And I think that then ties, and that's from Heather, and this kind of ties into Natalie's question. And Natalie asks, how do you implement the block connector program that don't have well-defined neighborhoods? So I was wondering, maybe you could talk about boundaries.
Yeah, so I think I love it. I'm gonna use Jean-Marie's. I think he would answer. It's that first question. Ask the context experts what makes sense for them. So if it's high density, high rises, they may say, well, the whole building, which would be pushing it, but because of the sense of connection, they can manage that kind of connectedness. If it's low density, if it's a rural setting, it's going to be the square kilometer is going to be tricky because, and we find that rural communities oftentimes have great sense of belonging and connection. So that's a large scale. So work with your context experts to decide. And when you're clear about the role, here's something that people will say. Well, why 20? Well, because in fact, there's enough challenges to deal with on a yearly basis, just among the 20 of you, the 20 households, that's enough. There's also research by Robin Dunbar in terms of, what number of relationships can we manage? Now to the other question, the second question, about what to do if we don't really have defined neighborhoods. To that, I would say to everyone, I'll just point you to a book, Emily Tallon, Oxford University Press, I think 2020. She talks about the importance of delineating your neighborhood. And she articulates as an urban planner, what an everyday neighborhood is. And so this is something we have to aspire to. And certainly the movement I mentioned earlier toward 15-minute cities or walkable cities all point to having, a more defined boundary, a center. All of those are important for the sense of belonging and identity. We want neighborhoods where maybe this could be a measure where people have T-shirts that say the neighborhood's name or jackets that have the neighborhood name on them. So those are challenges for municipalities. Emily Tallon, who's a scholar in this space, can help you along.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really great book. I really like how Emily kind of goes through the history and the development of the neighborhoods and how they change over time. So I'll make sure that I include a link to that book for those that are curious and learning more in the follow-up email. But with that, we are at the top of the hour. That went by really fast. I guess time flies when you're having fun. I just want to quickly say, Howard and Jean-Marie, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that was a really great conversation on a topic that I think a lot of people were interested in. I know I was personally interested in how we can evaluate gifts. And I think that from this conversation, we definitely have an idea of the direction to go. That is with ACE's theory of change and their impact report that will eventually go public, as well as just from the suggestions we had from Jean-Marie. So to those of the people who have unanswered questions, what we'll do is we'll reach out to Howard and Jean-Marie to just maybe answer them via a text, and we'll make sure to include that in the follow-up, as well as I think we will include both Jean-Marie and Howard's contact information for those maybe wanting to connect. I know there was a few international people on the call. I know Howard likes to build community across the world, so I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So on that note, I'll just hand it over to you, Howard and Jean-Marie, to say any final thoughts before we wrap up.
I would say just we should work to encourage collective curiosity and creativity. I think they are key words.
Yeah, I think it's exciting that we're all working together to the same end. What a great Canada, what a great world if we really help this supportive social unit of the neighborhood become all that it can be for us. I think it means human flourishing.
Beautiful. And I think on that note, we will end it there. So thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon, wonderful morning, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.